This was a lot of fun to do an interview with Brett Cyrgalis, who's written a wonderful new book called Golf's Holy War. A little bit provocative, but the battle for the soul of a game in an age of science. So that appealed to me for sure. I took away a few really interesting thoughts after doing the interview, which came a little bit surprising to me, and I think you'll really appreciate them. It was really interesting to hear Brett's take on Tiger Woods. I hadn't planned to talk much about Tiger Woods, but as you'll hear, Tiger actually has a huge influence, not only on the way that Brett and others visualize their golf game and try to work to improve, but also on the meta process of learning how to learn and to be a good student and scholar of anything. And I think that applies equally well to physics, as we discussed, as to golf. I also found it interesting to notice how golfers are now using principles from physics and physiology to improve their game to get, some say, an unfair edge. And I think, again, that goes above just the mere subject of golf itself into meta concepts of learning and how to really become an expert by stacking together different skills from science to physical fitness, et cetera. And I think those can be applied in almost any endeavor. So that was quite lovely. And also, obviously, the comparisons to Moneyball, which I felt are not incredibly accurate, that have been made, including on the cover of the book by some of the blurbers, as we say. But I found Brett to be incredibly interesting scholar, very curious and very humble. And I'm proud to have had him on the podcast. So I hope you enjoy it. Please subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps me out. We're doing quite well in the ratings, but we can always do better with your review, rating, etc. So keep tuning in. Stay creative. Stay imaginative. And I hope you enjoy this episode with Brett Cyrgalis on Golf's Holy War.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
So it's a pleasure for me to welcome to my podcast today the author of a science book. We normally have a predominance of scientists, but not always. But this is a new science book, and it's a book especially about physics. And it has on the cover a very interesting, giant nucleon called the Golfon, or in my case, the boson. And that's Brett Cyrgalis. Am I pronouncing your name right, Brett? Brett Cyrgalis?
You are, Brian. You nailed it. I've heard a lot worse, believe me.
Cyrgalis, and I worked on that for about 3 weeks. It wasn't as hard as I interviewed a man by the name of Patrick Bet David, who's originally from Iran, and I learned how to say, "My name is Brian Keating, the host of the Into the Impossible podcast. Welcome on the podcast to Mr. Bet David." And he just said, "Thanks. It's nice to be here." I'm like, that took me. Oh, I was in Farsi, by the way, and I was like, that took me like 3 years to memorize, and that's all I get is a thank you. He's like, "Oh, I thought you were Persian." Anyway, one thing I wasn't when I started reading your book was a golfer, but since a variety of different compounding forces that I want to get into, I've become a golfer, and I really didn't think I would appreciate the book as much as I did because I wasn't interested in golf. When I picked it up, I think it came out in May, right? Or in the spring, and it looked interesting, and it has a very provocative title, which I want to get into right away. But wasn't super into golf. And then this summer, thanks to COVID, I got really into golf and played my first 18 holes of golf over the span of 3 days. That's how long it took me to finish 18 holes. But I really was magnified my admiration and my pleasure because of your book. So I want to thank you very much for writing Golf's Holy War, the battle for the soul of a game in the age of science. And that portrays science in a very, kind of questionable light. So I want to first ask you, I always judge books by their covers. I don't care. I judge books by their covers, by their pictures, by the titles and their subtitles. How did you come up with the title, cover, and subtitle of your wonderful new book?
Well, the title just came to me one day when I was thinking about it, really. The subject, as I explained kind of in the prologue, it was a long time ago, and it was something that kind of hit me quickly. It was that, wow, there's this conflict. And as a writer, this is what you look for, right? You look for conflicts that are interesting, and both sides have some validity to them. And the title just kind of came to me at some point. I don't know how or why. But it did. And the subtitle has gone through a couple different iterations. Finding out that the editor of Simon and Schuster doesn't like gerunds in his subtitles was a new one. So I had to go back to my freshman English class in high school and remember what a gerund was.
But my last name is Jared, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, you're right.
So that explains why I didn't get a book deal from them.
And the cover was actually a lot of them. I had a great editor, this guy, Joe Ferrari Adler, who, they have a whole marketing department. And he was like, well, what do you think? What are you envisioning? And I envisioned something a lot starker and serious. And that was their first idea, was pretty much that. And I thought it was a little cartoony. But after a while, I didn't have any better ideas. They had 100 more ideas, and that one was still the best one. And I said, I don't know what I'm doing. So I don't, in terms of covers. So if you guys think this is good, and what's funny is you're not the first one to mention it, how it pops too. And I finally, for the first time last week, I went into a bookstore. It was the first time I've been in a bookstore since the book came out. And there it was, sitting there face out, which is what you want in a bookstore. And the cover really popped. So I'm happy it didn't turn out the way I thought in my head. And I'm happy they have pros doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's only one downside. It doesn't show up well against my green screen in the background, because that's part of the, they've done psychological studies that green really pops out because it's almost unnatural. People really get drawn to it. I want to ask about the writing process that you employed. I mean, as a first-time author, a first-time book author, but a long-time writer, New York Post and other outlets, which I want to get into. What was that switch like, going from a kind of daily grind or so to speak, quite frequent deadline writing, to writing a book that had, as far as I can tell, no deadline, no news hook, other than, the summer season's nice to have books about golf out, I imagine. But what was the difference in writing, kind of when you're on deadline versus you're off deadline? What's your kind of routine, and how did it differ in writing this wonderful book?
It was really different. And I had to detach myself. I had to do them at separate times, where I found out that I was very productive early in the mornings. So I'd wake up early, 5:30, 6 o'clock, and I would work on this because my mind was quieter. It was, you weren't overwhelmed with, even if you looked at the internet, even if I looked something up on the internet, I wasn't getting emails. I wasn't getting, notifications on Twitter and whatever else. There just wasn't anything going on. So that was when I was most productive working on the book. Because then once I got into deadline writing and regular writing, then it becomes you're turning it around. You're doing it fast. You need to be quick, and you need to get to the point. And there is an art in that. That a lot of people have forever have been way better than me at bringing out that artful side of that kind of writing, but it's different. So I kind of tried to detach the two. And working at the paper, there's 3 major daily deadlines, right? So, and if I'm covering a game, then it's as the game's going on at night, there's different deadlines. It becomes chaotic, right? Until you're done, and it's 1 a.m, and then you hope you didn't make a mistake, right? So working on the book was, I signed the deal with Simon and Schuster in 2012, and it came out in May of 2020. So there was a couple full drafts, where I got told, "Hey, good, cool, you did it. Now redo it." And the book is infinitely better because of such good guidance from people that have done that before. So the process was way different. But there are some things that carry over. I think you have to be concise as a writer. You have to get to the point, and you have to shy away from purple prose and overstating things. And I think that translates. And the one thing I will say about the timeliness of the book was, I had a lot of "oh crap" moments, because science is constantly changing, as you know, as well as anybody, right? So the science of golf is changing too. So as things were happening, it was, "oh no, I don't know about that." Oh and then I'd have to go look at it and be like, okay, either something has to change in what I did, or I have to learn about this and write about it. So there was a lot of that over 7 years of writing it. But what I tried to do is make it, as timeless as possible. Where at the very least, this will be what is modern there is a snapshot of a period of time, rather than, hey, look at what's breaking right now. Here's a snapshot of what I found to be a super interesting moment in the history of the game. And maybe you can look back on it in 30, 40, 50 years and see a description, a proper description of how the game got to where it is.
Yeah, and it did evolve so much, even over that relatively brief in the span of things. I mean, you talk about it being the oldest, if not, one of the oldest, if not the oldest games in the world that's still more or less played as it was back originally in Scotland and around the world. It's changed, but a lot of the change has accelerated exponentially. I've had Peter Diamandis on my show, and he talks about the exponential growth of technology and its impact to better society. He's a techno optimist. And I came away from this book, first of all, I really appreciated the appendix full of all the equations from general relativity and string theory, membrane theory. That was very impressive for a sports writer at the Post. I commend you on. Stephen Hawking said once that every equation cuts your readership in half. So luckily your readership will remain undiluted. I found it very interesting though that there's only one. I listened to the book on audiobook and I loved listening to it. I felt like, as Carl Sagan would say, you were inside my head relating ideas, from one brain to another brain. It was a wonderful read book by the reader. I forget his name, but it was quite well done. But there's only one picture in the physical book, and I won't spoil it for people who I want people to buy the book. I never ask the authors to disclose the entire thesis of the book, the takeaways of the book. 'Cause I want people to buy the book in every form possible. But there's only one picture in the book, and I wanted to just comment on that. And before we leave the topic of books and the writing process of books in general, and that picture is of your library. So why that picture? Why was that the only picture you decided to include?
Well, in terms of when I started thinking about a bibliography, it's impossible because everything I've ever read about the game is essentially in the bibliography. So it'd be every issue of Golf Digest and Golf World, and but I did buy an excessive amount of books for doing it, as my wife will testify. And so I thought it would be really cool to have the bibliography. And so it's I wanted it to say select bibliography and be just a picture of the bookshelf. Because this bookshelf behind me, that's just golf books, right? And there's more there. Believe me, there's more books hanging around. I have a growing science physics part of the library as well, in which you are included.
I'm looking for it. I don't see it in the book.
It's
in your non-golf.
Your book is right there, actually, right under mine, sitting horizontally.
Wow. Oh yeah, I see it there.
And I think Stefan Alexander's book's up there.
Yeah, there it is.
And that's Adam Becker's book, What is Real? And then Brian Greene catalog is around somewhere, and I think Sir Roger Penrose is over that'll only take me 5 or 6.
My podcast, I've had at least 2 of the 3 of those.
Yeah, it'll only take me 5 or 6 years to get there. Isn't a problem. That's what I wanted the bibliography to be. It was just that picture, and the editor was like, "Hey, that's a really good idea, but there actually needs to be a bibliography as well." So yeah, that's the one picture where the idea is that there is such an extensive literature of the game that's arguably the best literature in sports. George Plimpton's favorite line that the smaller the ball, the better the writing. There's some of the best writers who dabbled in sports have written about golf. So I think it's important to be well read to write something about the game, to be able to know the different perspectives. So that was just a snapshot of kind of some of the reporting and some of the research that went into the whole thing.
Yeah, we have an analogous saying: the smaller the particle, the better the writing in the physics. So I want to turn to the book itself. The book has this kind of contrasting, dualistic nature in that it's a book about science and the impact of technology and science, but it's also a book about, for lack of a better word, spirituality and soul. And which did you come away feeling more, plays a bigger role as a sort of a character device or perhaps a plot device rather, the science side of it or the soul side? I would say they kind of share, equal amounts of ink, so to speak. So which did you come away from your research and your explorations and interviews, et cetera, feeling is more at the heart of the game, the soulful side, spiritual side, the mystical side of golf, or the scientific, calculated, and not saying cold in a negative word, but the analytical side of golf?
I think there's a balance. I think every great player, every great coach has had a balance between the two, where there's an understanding of mechanics, right? So there's an understanding of the physical science that goes into it, but it can't just be that. There's more to executing athletically than just understanding the physical science of things. So that is where the kind of spiritual, soulful side of it is too, because it takes a lot, especially when you're trying to play under pressure. You can't just tell your body to execute. And this goes into neuroscience and psychology and all of this stuff. How do you execute physically? So you need to have some understanding of your mechanics, right? But there's more to it. There are questions that aren't easily answered that go into being able to do that. So the way I approached it was as objectively as possible, where I said, I'm a reporter, right? And I find there to be validity in both sides of this argument. So I want to give, I don't know, it's pretty close to equal space probably. It's somewhere near it, where it's, if you lean one way or the other, you can see the possible goodness in the other side. And maybe you agree with one more than the other. I think we all do. And I think that's just a point of all of our brain makeup. It's just how you are as a person. How do you learn? And that's a lot of part of the book is learning how to learn. And when you understand your own self, you understand which way you lean a little bit more, and you understand why. And it's not to say one is better than the other. It's just a matter of who you are as a person, and how you go about learning, in any aspect, whether it be in the classroom or on the driving range. So it's those two sides of it. I know where I lean, but I don't think that was, I tried not to make that part of it. This isn't, I wasn't trying, I was doing my best to not make it an argument. Here's a thesis, here's my argument, and I'm going to convince you. So a lot of the feedback I've gotten is from people on either side going, man, there's way too much science in there. Or going, there's way too much of that hippy-dippy BS in there. It's one or the other, because that's just the way people are. Right. And that's kind of what I wanted. I wanted it to be accessible to both sides of the argument, and both sides hopefully learning something about the other side.
And yet I came away with the inescapable comparison to Michael Lewis's Moneyball. And I think a lot of people have noted that, and that's high praise for your writing and for the subject matter at hand. Of course, in Moneyball, I think it's hard to argue that there are also in baseball, there's two sides to, there's the soul of the game, and then there's the metrics and so forth brought to the game. But I think it's hard to argue that things like, the shift and, different pitching, configurations and all the technology that's employed in baseball, not just to analyze outcomes, but to pregame each player. And like I said, the shift, I don't think that's benefited baseball. I don't think it would say you could benefit the soul of the game of baseball by having the shift. It may make it more efficient. It may make teams better, have better chances to win. But in golf, do you find that same kind of asymmetry exists, where the science can be good for improving individual scores, but does it really detract from the soul of the game in the same way that sabermetrics or whatever did, in many people's opinion, mine included, detract from the soul of baseball?
So, all right. So there's a slight distinction between Moneyball analytics and analytics in golf, because there's two sides. There's the analytics of your golf swing. So a lot of what I talked about was the science that teachers are using to help players get better, right? Give them be better, more efficient golfers. But the analytics that is analogous to Moneyball and baseball is the analytics of ShotLink and how PGA Tour players are playing the game and on the golf course. So I don't know how much you watched the U.S. Open this week, but Bryson DeChambeau is a big story. Guy, he gained 40 pounds. He hits it 1,000,000 miles. And that's because he found a loophole. I don't know how much a loophole, but he found an inequity in the stats of the PGA Tour where if you drive it that far, you are going to have a great chance to win no matter how else you do everything else. So then that's just a reflection of the golf courses that they're playing and how they're set up. So that is closer to Moneyball, where he found an inequity, right? And he said, okay, well, maybe you can compete and be a short hitter on the PGA Tour now, but you will not be a great player unless you every week in and week out, unless you hit it 1,000,000 miles. So unless they totally change the way they're setting up golf courses, that is what he found. So that is similar to the shift or finding a player or understanding the importance of on-base percentage or something like that, which is a lot of Moneyball. But the other side of the analytics would be analyzing the data you get from ball flight monitors and force place and 3D motion analysis and stuff like that, which is at the forefront of the game. So being able to understand that is a little bit different, because now golf is I find it to be one of the most interesting games because it's so internal. So there isn't a team. You can't kind of just follow, if you're a running back, you have a play and you execute the play, and your training is getting as in good shape and as good as you can, but you're still executing what somebody tells you. In golf, when somebody tells you to do something in your swing, you can't just change it. Like your brain and your body it just doesn't work like that. And so it's all about where you are internally. So that side of analyzing the data and understanding spin and everything, all of the million things that can go into it, is a different type of analysis. And that is where coaches are now too, where they are pretty much disseminating data and information. And then they have to understand what to give the student, because every student's a little bit different. So there are a coach would be remiss if they didn't understand the data and if they didn't use the science at their fingertips. But they would be just as negligent as if they gave all of it to their student, to every single student, because not everyone learns the same way. And I know for me personally, I wouldn't want to hear all that stuff. It would confuse me. I don't like looking at myself on video, but there are some people that they want to look every second. So how you analyze it changes from, are you competing on the PGA Tour? That's the kind of analytics that there is at that level. And then there's analyzing the data to help you, whether you're a PGA Tour player or, just started the game 2 months ago. There's understanding that as well. And how that affects the soul of the game. To me, it can, like where baseball has gotten a little less interesting, I think the PGA Tour has gotten a little less interesting too. And personally, when amateurs play the game, you kind of have to understand what draws you to it. What do you enjoy? Do you enjoy hitting balls on the range and getting a little bit better and seeing better numbers on a ball flight monitor? Or do you like the sunshine? Do you like walking? Do you like talking to the people? Do you like having fun and getting better and hitting better shots, but in the context of enjoying what the game has to offer? So soul means something different, I think, for everybody. And it's just a matter of how you kind of interpret it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary of kind of what I took away from the book, which is that, you might not be able to make use of a pitching analytics Amazon Web Statistics for baseball. But you won't have an ability to really, the launch angle was 109.3 degrees. Okay, good for you. But to the weekend golfer, that's not like, there is much more potential for improvement, as you point out. I think I also want to ask about, the impact of physics, literally, pun intended, with Bryson. Specifically, I was reading over the weekend that he uses all the same length clubs, which is 37.5-inch length. And I want to ask you about that. Is that, kind of another form of metric or scientific analysis that he's employing to do that, or is it just for convenience or for muscle memory?
No, he uses all of his irons are the same length, so like his driver is a little bit longer. He originally employed. So I get into this book in my book. I get into this book called The Golfing Machine, which it's pretty much a huge malleable equation where you can create your own swing and you can become a golfing machine. So he had one of these setups where it was, okay, here's how your wrists are set. Here's you swing on one plane, you do this. And he found it easier to execute through the bag if they were all the same length. So when they started selling those commercially, I thought it was a really bad idea. And they still sell them. And I don't mean to poo-poo any manufacturer, but it's a really bad idea for amateur golf. Like you really should not go to and buy a store and just buy those off the rack. Like you will struggle. The long irons will be way too hard. I mean, the short irons will be way too hard to hit. You're not going to swing it like that anyway. With the proliferation of club fitting, custom club fitting anyway, it doesn't make any sense. But that's what he thought. And he thought it was easier to execute the way he swung with those clubs. So he already said, like, next week he's going to start experimenting with an even longer driver to hit it even farther. So, he is what he is, and I think he's really interesting, and he's good for the game, because maybe people that are inclined to think like that are going to be drawn to him and are going to want to watch him.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly inescapable that there are certain physical advantages, and you point out the physical, but also the mental side. But I found it also like a stealth psychology book, and how these people kind of get along with their teachers and the mentor, mentos, I don't know, mentee. protege, mentee relationship, and how, that ranged from disparate forces going back to Hogan to Tiger Woods to, modern golfers, as you're talking about. I wonder, if you look at that, and you have really some wonderful statements about teaching, and that's obviously a big, important topic to me as a professor. And as a parent, I think there are different rules in there. But you talk about, and you said something very interesting in the book. You make a distinction between teaching versus fixing. And you say the clear-cut, really, distinction there is the role that curiosity plays. And I wonder if you could expand upon that. This is the podcast for the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination. We think about curiosity a lot. How does curiosity play a role in the differing teaching methods that you describe in the book?
Yeah, as I got later, I realized that a big part of this. Well, all right. So I'll give the anecdote of there's this great teacher out here on Long Island. Actually, his name's Mike Hebron, and there's a whole chapter about him. And so he was National Teacher of the Year in 1991, and he was very technical. And he used the golfing machine as kind of his template. And then eventually he started getting students that came, and some were getting better and some weren't. And the ones that weren't getting better, he made him very frustrated. He didn't understand why. And I think every teacher, golf pro, professor, I'm sure it's very similar in where you don't understand why some students are getting it and some aren't. And so he realized that he didn't understand anything about learning and how people learn. Mm-hmm. So he started taking he took classes at Harvard and MIT and UCLA, and he learned about how the brain works. And what they've started to understand is that you learn a lot better through failure and experience than you do through explicit information. Right? You learn better implicitly than you do explicitly. So the way he started teaching is in almost this abstract kind of way, where if you want to be a better chipper, he now kind of has you throwing tennis balls tethered to a lanyard so that you learn rhythm and that's it. And so his thing was, you kind of know what to do. And when you watch little kids taking golf lessons specifically, you see them learning just a lot easier than adults because they're just playing. And so you play to learn. So to me, that was the most interesting thing is that, and when you go, if you do these case studies of how people end up, how great athletes happen, right? How people end up PGA Tour or in the Olympics, it's odds are they came from an eclectic background. And this idea of being super specific is now, science is bearing out that it's not good. It's harder to become an elite athlete by just playing baseball your entire life or just playing golf. It's better to play different sports because then you learn how to be more athletic, right? You learn balance and hand-eye better than you learn how to do some specific motion over and over again. So then you can adjust on the fly and you understand. You intrinsically understand the physics of it a little bit better without actually understanding physics. To me, that's the best part. Of this whole process is that you end up getting to this point where it's okay. Here's all of this data and here's all of this science, and the best thing to do to get better is to play. Just go and play and experiment. And everybody hits shots differently. And look at where the ball goes and react to where the balls go and try to hit it in. Where you want. And the more you do that with yourself with some kind of minimal teaching, you don't need to be over taught. It's more just being pushed in the right direction and show that your curiosity will result in getting better if you're willing to keep playing. And I think that's such a healthy lesson for the way that our whole society has become so litigious and overtaught and specific, and it's better if you just go out and play because that is actually how your brain works. That is how you get better. That is how you get smarter. Aren't the books that stuck with you the most, Brian, the ones that you picked up on your own, not that a teacher gave you?
Yeah.
So maybe a teacher knows you and says, you know what, you're going to really like this, and then that sends you down a path. And that's what happened to me. I would assume that happened to most people, so that's kind of the thing. And if it's in golf specifically, it's, well, go and play and enjoy it and don't start hating it. It happens to a lot of kids who are young that want to play in college and go so forth, and where they start hating it and they get burnt out because it's just too much. And I'm sure that happens in academia constantly too.
Yeah, it happens extremely frequently, and the takeaway I get from that section of the book is that and I believe this applies directly into teaching physics or teaching painting or whatever, and it's that the first and most important lesson is to kind of coach somebody to be coachable, because if somebody's coachable and they start young, there's almost no limit to what they can do. I mean, we're all born with the same, talent, so to speak, to acquire things that we're curious about. And that role of curiosity really does separate the really high flyers, the successful people in any endeavor. And I think, I look at someone like Tiger, or you look at someone in baseball, who studies the game, who really focuses in on the game, loves the history, loves the classics, same in chess, and any kind of skill game or strategic game, as golf is certainly founded upon. But I think what's so appealing to me about the book and about the sport in general is that it has these many dimensions. And so it's kind of like as deep as you want to go. If you want to go, really sparse, you can go back to the old country, right? In Scotland, you describe how sparse and Spartan the original, Highlands courses were, and people still love it. I mean, they pay thousands of dollars to go and play today. Or you can go to Torrey Pines, where it's pictured in behind me in my screen, which is only a couple miles away from campus and from UCSD, which is one of the many reasons I like to try to recruit students to come here if they're interested in golf. And I actually was at the 2008 U.S. Open that Tiger Woods won, but I left before he won because I left on the Sunday, so he went into a Monday playoff, I think, if I recall correctly. And I was like leaving on Sunday, and I was like, we get out of the parking lot before it gets too crowded. And it's like I heard this eruption when he sank you could tell better than me, some very long putt. and much to my chagrin, I should have stayed and watched it because that was a classic for all time. How much of a role does Tiger continue to play in golf? Obviously, his career is punctuated. I want to talk about the more tawdry aspects of it. I think I leave that to your colleagues on page 6 over there, my favorite section besides your writing. But his sort subsequent comebacks and declines, etc. How big an effect is the Tiger effect still to this day?
It's huge. It's huge. To me, Tiger is the modern golfer. He took the game from where it was as a kind of a niche pastime. You go from Bobby Jones into Hogan into Nicklaus, and it's still kind of, it grew, and Arnold Palmer had a big part of it growing in the Masters. But it was always kind of a country club type thing, right? And there was a very small group of people that were super interested in it, and that was it. And then Tiger took it from that era to this one, right, where everything he did mattered. So, and when he got into science and all of the science that was coming through, that's when everybody else got into it. And you look at the young guys that are on the tour now, and they openly admit it. I mean, Bryson openly admitted after he won the U.S. Open that they are all inspired by Tiger, and they're inspired to get in better shape, become better athletes. Tiger, took golf and dragged it into the modern era. And so what I think in my book, where it's this conflict between science and art, he has balanced that as well as anybody. So I get asked the question a lot too, do you think he would be better? Do you think his career would have been better if he didn't get so bogged down in technicality and teaching? And the answer is no. It couldn't have been anything but what it is, because that is who Tiger is. That is who he was in that moment. He was infinitely curious about what was out there, and that was part of what made him great. So that is why he went from teacher to teacher and method to method, because he kept needing to get better, and he kept needing to learn and learn and learn. That was just the way he was. So that's like saying, if he wasn't Tiger Woods, would he have the same record? It's like, that's just who he is, and that's where he went. So I still think he is that guy, and I hope he will be. I hope he doesn't kind of fade away, and he's going to stop playing at some point. He's going to stop being less of a force in the game. But where does it leave the game now? We can talk about that for hours, and where the state of the PGA Tour is, and where it might go from here without him, because it's a really interesting question. But he did kind of modernize the game, and he's still, there's only a couple of guys in golf that move the needle, and he's still number one by leaps and bounds.
Yeah. And he's so influential culturally outside of golf, obviously with the impact of race and being, multi-ethnic, multiracial. Such an interesting person, and so obviously accomplished. And, it's hard to find people that are role models despite having fallen from grace. And of course, there's no such thing as I always point out, when someone's trying to date or whatever, I say there's no such thing as a perfect man. My wife got the last one. But the point I think about Tiger is that he, if you look at him and how much of a scholar he was, I mean, he's probably got a bookshelf that will put your bookshelf to shame because he is such a student of it. And naturally, I think it's unavoidable reading this book, a question that you've probably been asked a million times, but I'd like to be on the record, on the Into the Impossible podcast, which is, how good do you think someone like a Ben Hogan or Ben Crenshaw or Arnold Palmer would have been with the technology, TDI, these club analytics, the technology that really started to come about in the early 2000s, intimately connected with like military technology, which you point out so interesting. But with the technology that we have available today, how good were these golfers of yore? How good would they have been?
I think it's impossible to speculate, because it was just different. It's just different. Because would Ben Hogan's swing look the same if he was using the technology that they have now? No. And then if his swing wasn't the same, would he be as good? Right. So it's almost impossible. I mean, Bobby Jones was using hickory shafted clubs and was playing with gutta perches that were pulled out of trees, right? Like rubber that was pulled out of trees. So it's impossible. It's impossible to know, just as it's impossible to go in reverse and say how good would Bryson be if he was playing against Bobby Jones in the 20s. You have no idea. You can't. It's impossible. It's impossible to speculate. It's like saying, how good would a modern scientist be back if they were dealing with Einstein before relativity or something, right?
Or Einstein with a supercomputer, right? That's what I was thinking about.
Right. Exactly. Well, exactly. How good would Einstein be with a supercomputer? You have no idea, because he didn't even know what a computer was, right? So you have no idea how these eras compare when they're so different. It's fun to argue who was better in their time, in their moment. Was Bobby Jones better in his moment than Tiger was in his? Or was Nicklaus better? I mean, Nicklaus' career was so long and constantly successful that, to me, he's the best player of all time. But is Tiger the most talented? Is Tiger, things are so different, and it's fun barroom talk. But I think it's impossible to put them together and say, how good would this person have been in a different era, because it's just, the games are just so different.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I think it's natural to speculate, not only barroom wise, but also because the game itself is so historic that you look back on, the sport that's, basically unaltered in a certain sense. You're chasing around this little ball in a beautiful setting in nature, and it's really something you can't do indoors in in an enclosed stadium. And it does lend itself to technological improvements, I think. And I think the impact of technology on the average person, I once heard it said, nobody looks at Michael Jordan, taking off from the free throw line on a dunk and says, oh, I'm going to do that this Saturday at my pickup game. But everybody looks at, Tiger Woods, hitting a 3-foot, from the upper right on a par 3. It's, I could probably do that, but in reality, I think there's the technology, not only in swing dynamics, et cetera, but also in the club technology, in the course design, and there's a lot of interesting developments. I quite frankly, as I said, I was never interested in golf. My brother, to his chagrin, would always try to get me interested, and it wasn't really until I had kids, and now I've got an old enough son, and my kid can take me out, and he can do almost as well as me. And I think that's kind of the great equalizer. It's sort of a chance to spend uninterrupted time, usually in a pretty nice setting. But I wonder, if it's not out of reach for many people, and what the impact of that is going to be, and what the PGA thinks about that. So I wonder, what's sort of the future of kind of, especially with COVID, et cetera, what's the impact likely to be of the cost of golf and maintenance, et cetera, and technology for getting youth more interested in the game?
Yeah, it's a really complex and interesting question. I think one of the most attractive things about the game is how, when you go to a great old golf course, you are walking in the footsteps of people behind you, and you're walking in the footsteps of history. So you go to Torrey Pines, and I'm sure how many people hit that same putt that Tiger made on the 72nd hole, and everybody wants to do that. And in no other sport, can you go to Lambeau Field and, let's say, play a game? Maybe, but you're not playing in front of the people. It's not the same thing. And no, you can't, right? Maybe they'll let you in the doors, but you're not going to play a football game there anyway. But you can go to St. Andrews in Scotland, where they've played the game for a millennium, and walk in the same footsteps of old Tom Morris and Jack Nicklaus and Bobby Jones and Tiger Woods, and you can hit the same shots. It's like interacting with this piece of art that other places won't let you. You're not. It'd be like having an art class in the Sistine Chapel or something. It's which is not even close to being the same thing, because you're interacting with something so special. And then you get a feel for what those people went through, because you're looking at the same green, you're looking at the same tee shot, and you're hitting it. You're having to do it for yourself. It's an interactive experience, and that is what to me, that's one of the biggest things that draws me to the game. And one of the biggest problems that the PGA Tour, or the governing, let's just say the governing bodies of the game faces, because these great golf courses are slowly getting obsolete with the way technology has gotten. So it's a problem that the game, really the three biggest reasons the game is shrinking is it's too hard, it's too expensive, and it takes too long. And that all three of them come back to the golf course, because there was this trend in architecture through post-World War II boom where everyone wanted a championship golf course. And this happened again in Tiger boom, where they wanted the harder, the better, right? And that means longer. It means, which is more irrigation, right? More water. It's more land. So now it costs more. And because it's harder, it's going to take you longer. So it's more difficult to get people into the game on golf courses like that, where to me, the best golf courses ever built are challenging the scratch player and equally as fun for the guy who's trying to break 100. Yeah. And they're the hardest ones to design because it takes so much thought going into them. And you have to be able, that's the way you're bringing people in. There has to be more fun alternatives to it, and they have to be drawn by the top. It's always from the top down. So the PGA Tour has become this kind of diluted product where 4 weeks a year matter. The majors matter. Once the Ryder Cup once every 2 years matters, but even that is not. There's not really a lot of golf. It's more the hype that has surrounded it. And the other years are just not, and the other tournaments are just not super interesting. I mean, I probably like golf as much as anybody on the planet. And a lot of the other tournaments I don't watch intently because I don't really care who wins, because they're not that interesting. And what's going to make them interesting is better golf courses and better marketing for the players, and having that come down to the people who are playing. And so if your kid's bringing you out, who's the person he's looking at? What are the courses they're playing that he likes, and how does that become part of the the landscape of fandom? And that to me, there's a lot that goes into answering that question, but it's doable. It's doable. And golf's kind of in this perilous phase right now where it's like it could go one way or the other. I mean, there's such a draw on attention spans out there. I mean, short attention spans. There's a million things you can consume, a million ways you can consume them. How is golf going to distinguish itself? And right now they have the 4 majors in the Ryder Cup, and after that, it's not that, and Tiger Woods. And after that, it's just not what's bringing people to the TV or to your tablet, like what's doing it. And there's a lot of questions that golf has to answer. Coming up,
part of the soul searching they're going to have to do, and hopefully guided by a lot of the precedent that you talk about in this lovely book. I want to conclude with a couple of questions about your future. First, do you think, I came away naturally wondering, well, let me take another sport that I'm not that interested in, that some people play mostly in the northern part of the country, in Canada, et cetera, although some play out here, and then, kind of give the Cyrgalis treatment to it, and that's hockey, which you obviously cover. It's played with a stick, kind of looks a little bit like it. And if you're Happy Gilmore, when Adam Sandler's character, you can probably hit like that. Is that a possibility on the horizon for you? Hockey's holy war?
I thought this was a very specific thing that was going on in the game of golf right now. So it's not like, hey, I banged out my golf book, now the next is the hockey book. It's just, this was a very specific thing I wanted to get into, and like we were talking about before, it's like what you're most curious about is what you're gonna be the best at. So golf to me it's always it's the forefront of my mind constantly. So this took a long time to do, and the only reason I was able to get through it was because I care so much about the game, and I care about what I was writing about. So, and that's not to say I don't care about hockey. I do, but I don't see the same. Now, who knows? Maybe there's a great story out there in hockey that I just haven't seen yet.
I would love for you to explore that. As I said, I mean, I think if you can bring interest to somebody who began the reading of the book, the listening to of the book, so close to it, and feeling that there is this other dimension, and there is something for anyone who's interested and curious about the game, because it has a technical, I always forget if I'm left brain or right brain, but it has both sides of the brain, which probably means I'm only one side or half of a side of a brain anyway. So conclusion, I want to ask you guys a couple of questions. Mainly about the kind of influence of physics. We talked on Twitter a couple times about, kind of your math phobia, but you have these pretty highbrow topics and discussions of things like string theory, M theory, et cetera. What about physics? Of course, there's a famous book called The Physics of Golf. You probably have it on your shelf somewhere in the back. I can't see it. If you don't, I'll get you a copy of it, because it's a wonderful book. And it's full of equations, so it won't get more than 1,024th of the number of books of readers as you have, but nevertheless, it kind of layers into it a little bit more. And there's a book, The Physics of Baseball, which is nicely paired with Moneyball or something like that as well. But the question of kind of the influence of physics to you, it seems like it has a pretty lofty, at least, place in your reverence for subjects. I don't know of too many physicists who actually played golf. I mean, physicists have been interested in baseball. Talked about baseball, of course. They're interested in all sorts of casino games like poker, et cetera. They're interested in playing the bongos or so forth. I just wonder what is it about physics specifically, or what is it about golf maybe that doesn't appeal to physicists, or maybe conversely, what appeals to golfers so much about physics, and you in particular?
Well, to me, physics is it's a study of the physical world, right? So how is golf not affected by that? And not just like the geometry, right? It's not, we're like that, because that's like almost a separate thing. It's to me, like what modern physicists are doing is as interesting as anything I can think of. And I don't understand almost all of it, right? But the little pieces that I do understand, how are you not interested in the makeup of the physical world, right? And the more I've learned about it, the more interesting it gets to me. So if I'm writing a book about golf, how does the makeup of the universe not come into play, right? It has to, because it comes into play on everything. Right. So, there was a couple revelations for me, where I was an English guy. I was a literature English guy. And I remember I bought The Elegant Universe in a bookstore. And I remember it clear as day. It was probably, I don't know, 10 years ago or so. I was sitting on my couch, and that was the first time I understood relativity my whole life. And so, which is sad, probably, for my education, but yeah. And to me, that was it. And then I fell off this cliff of reading everything I could get my hands on, because I didn't understand quantum mechanics. I didn't understand uncertainty, all of that stuff. And then, Stephen Hawking and black holes, which is your specialty, and that. I didn't understand any of that, but I don't get how people are not interested in that. And to me, so I think probably physicists don't care that much about sports because it seems trivial compared to what they're doing. Where I don't understand why more golfers aren't drawn to that too, because maybe they're a little more sportsman and jock, if you will. And so, but there's definitely in the middle of that Venn diagram, there are a lot of people. I found something interesting too, where you think in this time where everyone's becoming more analytical, that more people would be drawn to the golfing machine type of archetype. But way more people have read Golf in the Kingdom. Which is this very spiritual, kind of semi-fantastical book. I get people saying that all the time, like, "Oh man, I read Golf in the Kingdom, and it really resonated with me, and more so than anything else. And I didn't know anyone else had read it, or or I didn't know it before I read your book, and now I picked it up and read it, and it's like my favorite thing. So people attach themselves to that spirituality of it too. But to me, that links right into modern science too. We're like, oh, well, maybe you're trying to figure it out. Maybe there's more to this picture than meets the eye. Maybe there's more to space-time than the 4 dimensions we know. So I think it's linked. I think it's for me at least it's incredibly linked, and I really can't detach the two. And I'm happy you didn't rip on me for getting string theory wrong, and so, which I'm sure I did in some regard. But
we'll talk about that later off camera.
Yeah.
But I want to conclude with a very serious question, and that is, have you landed Brad Pitt to play you in the movie version of Golf's Holy War?
I just assumed that was what was going to happen, but I'll have my agent working on it. Yeah.
Well, Brett Cyrgalis, this has been a joy to talk to you. A little bit different tack for me on the Into the Impossible podcast, but maybe not so much because we got into science and even string theory, but we discussed the soul and the other aspects that I think resonate so beautifully in this wonderful book, Golf's Holy War. I've been speaking with Brett Cyrgalis, who's a writer for the New York Post. He covers hockey and baseball as well as golf, obviously, and he's a member of the Metropolitan Golf Writers Association. He lives on Long Island, and where I came from, my ancestral homeland. So it's good to talk to a fellow Islander. Too bad the Islanders themselves are not going to make it to the Stanley Cup this year, but hope springs eternal. You're talking to somebody from San Diego, where we have the easiest possible jobs for weather reporters, but the hardest jobs for sportscasters. So if you ever want a challenge, come out here and report. Although the Padres made the playoffs, so I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, well, you got something, and that's beautiful baseball weather too. Every day.
Golf and baseball. I'd love to play around with you someday, Brett. Maybe out here in Torrey Pines, beautifully located right adjacent to campus at University of California, San Diego, or there on Long Island, my ancestral home and your current home. Brett Cyrgalis, thank you so much for joining us on the Into the Impossible podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Brian. Appreciate it.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
If you enjoyed this episode of Into the Impossible with Professor Brian Keating, please subscribe, comment, share, and review. Watch on YouTube, listen on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or Stitcher. We appreciate hearing from you and are always open to your suggestions for future episodes. For more information and to sign up for Professor Keating's mailing list, go to drbriankeating.com. That's drbriankeating.com. Follow Professor Keating on Medium and Twitter at Dr. Brian Keating, Dr. Brian Keating. For more information on the Clark Center, go to imagination.ucsd.edu. Into the Impossible is a production of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination at the University of California, San Diego, in the Division of Physical Sciences. Eric Veary, Director. Brian Keating, Co-Director. Produced by Brian Keating and Stuart Valco.